Hi, it's Kyffin Lovates here, and today I thought I would try to explain all the changes that have happened to Ethereum over the last 2 or 3 years, culminating in yesterday's upgrade to the Ethereum network. The Shapella upgrade as it's known by some, or the Shapella upgrade as it's known by others, or if you want to be technically precise, the Shanghai and Capella upgrade, which I think is kind of a portmanteau like Brangelina or Benefer. And the analogy I'm going to use is a shift in the government of a nation from a monarchy to a parliamentary system. So we go back to, I think, October 2020, when you can compare Ethereum to a monarchy. There's a single chain functioning using a consensus system known as proof of work, and the single chain is also running an EVM, or Ethereum virtual machine, that handles the execution of smart contracts on that chain. So we have sort of one core chain handling everything. And in October 2020, a smart contract was deployed on Ethereum, which became the staking contract for Ethereum. So this is the first move away from proof of work towards proof of stake, which we can compare to a parliamentary democracy, where you have parliament and then you have an executive, the government. So we're replacing the king with two parts, a parliament and a government. And in this analogy, the parliament is like the consensus layer and the government is like the execution layer. And in fact, to use the terminologies of the chain, this parliament is called the beacon chain, and the execution, or the executive, is called the execution chain. So we haven't quite got there yet. What we have is the opportunity for people to stake Ether in this smart contract, which at this point looks like an ordinary smart contract and behaves like one, and that locks up your ETH and sets you up for becoming a validator, which is like becoming an MP in Parliament. Then the next phase is the launch of the beacon chain. And so the beacon chain is like Parliament, except at this point the beacon chain isn't connected to the main chain, which is still running along. So it's like having a nation that is ruled by a king, but they've gone and built the Houses of Parliament, and they put all the benches and seats in it, and they're starting to lay out the procedures whereby Parliament will function. Then the next step that we have, if I remember correctly, is the change to the block rewards for miners on the Ethereum chain. And at this moment we have this single chain handling the consensus and the execution, and that upgrade, which I think is called London, happened in August 2021, and it removed the block reward from miners. So that's kind of like the barons and knights working for the king no longer getting paid as much as they used to. So they're being disincentivized to continue the feudal monarchistic system that is currently in place in August 2021, and the support for the king is waning. Then we have a few upgrades along the way. One's called Altair, if I remember rightly, another one's called Bellatrix. These are changes to the beacon chain that introduce penalties for validators that don't do their job properly. So that's like saying, right, we're going to have some rules for MPs in our parliament, where if they don't turn up for all the votes on the various issues that the chamber is addressing, we're going to fine them. So at this point, Parliament is still not functioning. I mean, it's working as a kind of model, but it's not actually being used by the nation in question. And then we have the big upgrade known as Paris, or more colloquially as the merge. And this is the point where we see Ethereum move from being a monarchy to being a parliamentary democracy. The kings pushed out the way. The consensus system, the proof of work system in the main chain is removed, and the main chain now becomes purely concerned with execution of smart contracts. And the beacon chain becomes active. So that's like Parliament now becoming the system where the laws are enacted, and then the execution chain is the one that actually makes sure that those laws actually happen. And I could go into the details of how the beacon chain works, but it does get quite complicated. The simple summary is that you select committees that produce a random number by each picking what is supposed to be a random number, and as long as one of the members of the committee picks a genuinely random number, the output is random, and that random output is used to select who is the next validator. So don't know what a great analogy for that would be. I guess it's like picking who's going to be the leader of the House for each short term of 12 seconds by picking a random selection of MPs to decide on that issue. It's not the greatest analogy, but maybe it works. So now we have the beacon chain connected to the execution chain, and the beacon chain is handling the consensus, and the execution chain is handling the Ethereum virtual machine and the running of smart contracts. And that was the merge. But there was an issue, which is that staking contract that I initially mentioned, the thing that you pay 32 ETH to become a member of parliament who gets to decide in the committee who gets to decide what goes on to the execution chain, isn't fully functional at this point. You can put your ETH into it, but you can't get it out. And that's where the big change happened yesterday. The final parts of that staking smart contract running on the execution chain got enabled. And that meant that bits of functionality that allow you to join the queue to withdraw your 32 ETH stake and step down from being a member of parliament is now functional, and people can start getting their staked ETH out. And there is one interesting thing about all of this, which is the two upgrades, Shanghai and Capella, are upgrades primarily to the execution chain, i.e. the EVM part, and the beacon chain, i.e. the consensus part. And what they do is they allow this one smart contract to have some special functionality and some special information about the two chains that other smart contracts don't have, which is it makes that staking contract a special contract that has some tentacles going down into the deeper underlying protocol level of the chain. And the reason this is needed is because some information from the beacon chain needs to be transferred to that smart contract on the execution chain, which isn't normally available to smart contracts. And that information is to say, yes, this person is a validator, and yes, they have staked this amount, and yes, they have been running, and now they wish to get out. And that's why there has to be a change both to the beacon chain and to the execution chain. So that hopefully gives you enough information to understand vaguely how all this stuff has worked over time, and possibly as well why it's been done in pieces. The main reason for that is to ensure that all the little work, all the moving parts slot together nicely, and the whole thing doesn't come grinding to a halt if it were all to be released at once. And I commend the Ethereum group for that. I think their approach of doing small changes bit by bit and testing them before releasing them on the mainnet is the right conservative approach to a blockchain holding as much value as Ethereum. But it looks like it's all running nicely, and the final step has been achieved. And indeed, now Ethereum is less like a monarchy based on the might of your proof of work mining equipment, and more like a parliament, albeit one where you buy your seat in the chamber with 32 ETH, which at current prices is, let me see, probably about $64,000. Still cheap compared to the campaigning costs of the USA. Anyway, that's today's video. I hope it's given those of you with a technical mindset the information you need to go and dig into this further if you're interested. It's hard to get through the swathes of articles on all of this that are purely focused on speculator and investor issues to actually get through to the technical details. But my advice is to go to ethereum.org, which is always a good first go-to point for anything on Ethereum, because all this stuff is there, including all the repositories where you can find the source code to the staking contract and the changes to the Ethereum nodes that implement this beacon chain and the execution chain. So I hope you found that interesting, and I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye for now.